Working definitions tonight, again, is just science. But again, we'll be using this word a number of times as we talk about the processes that we're looking at tonight. Webster's defines science, knowledge about the natural world that's based on facts learned through experiments and observation. And so with that being said, Pastor, again, because we didn't pray, did we pray? I don't even know. I'll pray again. No, we'll keep going. So, hey, A-game. Going back to the lineages there in Genesis, beginning chapter 1, going all the way to chapter 50, we really have the first 2,300 years of man's existence. You combine this with the genealogies as outlined by Luke and Matthew, and again, you get this idea that the creation is very young, greater than 6,000 years, less than 7,000 years. There's a biblical timeline that we looked at a number of times. Again, the flood, 1,656 years after the creation. The cross, somewhere around, let's say, 4,200. Again, can go a couple hundred either way. But ultimately, less than 7,000, greater than 6,000. We've talked about this for the last 2 weeks. This will be the last time we say this, but science does not produce ages. If we push science for the age of people or things, we must remember that it has limitations. It can produce a minimum, it can produce a maximum, it can produce a range, but that's all it can do. It can't say this is that age. Equally, within that within that max, within that range are assumptions. And as those assumptions break down, that age breaks down with it, and it can reach the point where it's not just has some error, but it can become completely erroneous. So science cannot do what history can do when we refer to ages. Last week, Dr. Jason Lyle talked briefly about comets. We'll pick up there tonight because I have a few more things that I want you to hear. Short period comets, that are those that have an orbit less than 200 years. Life expectancy behind any scientist you read behind is about 10,000 years, no more. Those short period comets point to a young creation. This next video clip is from Spike Psaris. You'll remember him. It's from the series What You Aren't Being Told About Astronomy. Here he deals with where the evolutionists say comets are coming from to replenish all the comets that should have been destroyed billions of years ago.
So where are all these nuclei?
Evolutionists believe
that they're in two different places,
the
Oort cloud and the Kuiper Belt. Evolutionary models need both of these sources to explain comets, and recent discoveries have disproved both of them. We'll start with the so-called Oort cloud, named after the astronomer who first invented this idea. He figured that there must be a huge cloud of comet nuclei way out in a large sphere-shaped cloud surrounding the solar system. The Oort cloud has three major problems. Number one, it's never been seen. As the late astronomer Carl Sagan wrote, many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution. Yet there is not yet a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. Why hasn't anybody ever seen it? Because according to evolutionary models, it's impossible to see it or measure it because it's too far away. You just have to accept it on faith and believe it exists. Remember that the next time somebody challenges you for believing in creation because it's religious and not scientific. The evolutionary model actually requires more faith than the creation model. Anyway, that's problem number one with the Oort cloud. Problem number two is just discovered recently. The evolutionary model says the comets originally formed in the TNO region, which is why we're talking about comets now in the TNO part of our tour. But the Oort cloud is supposedly much farther out than that and surrounds the sun in a huge sphere. How did all the comets get way out there? Evolutionists used to think that the comets migrated out there after they formed, but scientists have now realized this is impossible. It turns out that in the evolutionary model, there would be a lot of collisions along the way, and few comet nuclei would survive the trip. They'd be smashed into powder instead. So the Oort cloud, even if it did exist, would have far too few comet nuclei. It couldn't supply the comets that evolutionists need for their billions of years. Problem number 3 is that many comets couldn't have come from an Oort cloud. These comets are called short period comets because they orbit the sun in a short period of time, 200 years or less. Short period comets don't last long. As I mentioned earlier, they can only go around the sun a certain number of times before they're destroyed or leave the solar system completely. The maximum lifespan for a short period comet has been estimated to be 10,000 years or less. Obviously, if the solar system was really billions of years old, we wouldn't see these comets anymore, unless there was a constant supply of new ones coming in to replace the old. However, a few years ago, evolutionists realized that the Oort cloud couldn't supply them. Short period comets have certain orbital characteristics that make it impossible for them to have come from an Oort cloud, which is way out there in space. So, most evolutionists today also believe in something called the Kuiper Belt. This would be a disk of comet nuclei orbiting out beyond Neptune in the TNO region that we've been talking about. Again, these have been sitting out there quietly for billions of years. But every once in a while, one of them gets disturbed, moves in closer to the sun, and turns into a comet. Therefore, says the evolutionist, it's no problem that we still see short period comets today. Yes, they only last for a few thousand years once they start orbiting closer to the sun, but there's an endless supply waiting up beyond Neptune to keep replenishing them. Unfortunately for evolution, recent discoveries have shown the Kuiper Belt model doesn't work any better than the Oort cloud did. First of all, NASA and other space agencies have been busy in the last few years studying comets. We've actually visited several comets with spacecraft. We sent the Deep Impact spacecraft to crash a probe into a comet called Tempel 1 to see what we could learn about the comet's structure. In an even more amazing feat, the Stardust spacecraft recently visited the Wild 2 comet. The probe actually flew through the comet's tail, collected material from it, and brought it back to Earth. Evolutionists were shocked when they examined this material. Remember, in the evolutionists' story, comets were formed in the outer reaches of the solar system. The evolutionary model says that things that formed way up there must contain certain elements and must not contain certain other elements. Well, we've discovered that comets aren't like this. The volatile materials that evolutionists expected to find in the comet's tail were either rare or non-existent. On the other hand, most of the material was made up of silicates that the evolutionary model says can't have been out there where comets were supposedly born. So in many ways, comets have turned out to be the direct opposite of what the evolutionary model predicted. But there's another problem too. The Hubble Space Telescope was recently used in a massive search for comet nuclei to confirm that they're actually there. The search was the biggest study that anybody had ever done of the TNO region so far out there in space. Evolutionists expected to find about 85 comet nuclei in the region they searched. How many did they actually find? Only 3. This has massive implications. Even the scientists in charge of the project admitted that this is serious trouble for the overall idea of comet nuclei out there. These results mean that the number of comet nuclei is at least hundreds and possibly even thousands of times less than the number required for supplying short-period comets. The project's report said that the number of nuclei found was, quote, wildly inconsistent, with what evolutionists had expected. This means that evolutionists have no source for short-period comets. Therefore, they can't explain how we still see comets today after billions of years, even though these comets burn up after only thousands of years. Maybe it's because the solar system isn't really billions of years old.
1950, based on a study of orbits of several long-period comets, the Dutch astronomer Jan Oort proposed, in my case that means hoped, wished, or prayed, that a great spherical shell of comets existed at the remote frontiers of our solar system to replenish all these comets that had burned out. Thus, the Oort cloud was born. Now, he didn't mention how far the Oort cloud is, so let me explain what Jan proposed. It's 50,000 astronomical units away from us. If you remember, an astronomical unit is the average measurement from us to the sun, 93 million miles. So it's 50,000 times 93 million miles away from us. That's where this cloud of supposed comet nuclei remains. No one has ever seen this Oort cloud. It's hard to see a comet at 1 AU from the Earth, much less 50,000 AUs. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. I would submit unto you that Oort invented the Oort cloud to give an answer for why we still see comets. This is Danny Faulkner on comets and the Oort cloud. In his publication, he said this: since it cannot be detected, the Oort cloud is not a scientific concept. This is not bad science, but non-science, masquerading as science. The existence of comets is good evidence that the solar system is only a few thousand years old. Again, I would ask you, as you think about comets, as you think about the Oort cloud, as you think about the Kuiper belt, are they scientific, or really is the answer that's scientific that comets prove a young creation? So I have two theories here. Theory number one, the reason we cannot detect the Oort cloud is because, you got it. Theory number two, there ain't one. Thank you, brother. Theory number two, the reason we find comets in our solar system that all scientists agree could only last for thousands of years is because, exactly, that's my two theories here. The next thing I want to talk about is the faint sun paradox. So this is our sun, 1 astronomical unit from Earth, 93 million miles away, powered by thermonuclear fusion. It's a ball of hot plasma in space, comprised of 73% hydrogen, 25% helium, and small parts of oxygen, carbon, neon, and iron. It's a G-type main sequence star. You can loosely refer to it as a yellow dwarf. They estimate that the center of our star is about 15 million degrees Kelvin, with the surface temperature being approximately 6,000 degrees Kelvin. 93 million miles away, 6,000 degrees Kelvin on the surface. Oh, and by the way, just so you know, if you take all the mass of our solar system, the sun represents 99.86% of the mass in our solar system. It is huge. Now, you see that thing right there, you might refer to that as a flare, a solar flare, and in a sense it is, but it's really called a prominence. Now, to give you an idea of how big that prominence is, or maybe how small the Earth is in comparison to the sun, let me throw the Earth up there on the picture for you. You probably can't see it. It's that little dot right there. That's how big the Earth is compared to the sun. 99.8% of the mass of the universe. So there's the sun compared to all the planets in the universe. Now think of this big, hot, very far away star is exactly the star we needed at exactly the distance, providing the perfect conditions for life on Earth. We're going to talk about Goldilocks style. That's funny you should say that. Now this is our sun compared to Sirius. Sirius is much bigger than our sun. This is our sun compared to Arcturus. Wow, there's our sun right there. Arcturus is much bigger. Here's Betelgeuse, even bigger. You can't even see our sun now. Our sun has shrunk down to a dot that I can't replicate on the computer screen anymore. But again, exactly what we needed at exactly the right distance. I told you it was a G-type main sequence star. There's our sun right here on this heat luminosity display. Exactly what we needed to support life on Earth. But let's get to the faint sun paradox. This next video clip is from Creation Moments. The speaker's Ian Taylor, and he really introduces this faint sun paradox issue.
How did we survive before the sun got brighter? How did we survive before the sun got brighter? An evolutionary problem on today's Creation Moment. Creation Moments host. And now, here's our Creation Moments host, Ian Taylor.
Let's assume for a moment that the evolutionary explanation for the origin of the Earth and the Sun is correct. The Sun formed about 4.6 billion years ago. Let's imagine that evolutionists are right in saying that life originated on Earth about 3.5 billion years ago. This scenario creates many scientific problems, but today we want to focus on one problem that is seldom mentioned. One implication of these assumptions is that the Sun today is about 40% brighter than it was 4.5 billion years ago. This means that 3.5 billion years ago, the Sun was bathing the Earth in considerable less energy than we receive today. Under those conditions, life as we know it today could not have existed. Yet, we are told that it was under these very conditions that life supposedly evolved. Evolutionists are aware of this problem. In an attempt to solve it, they theorize that the early Earth had more greenhouse gases, which would have held the Sun's heat more efficiently and produced the same temperature range that life enjoys today. They then theorize to the atmosphere we have today, the mix of these gases gradually changed to the atmosphere we have today at the same rate that the sun was sending more energy to Earth. This explanation is so unlikely that one scientific paper actually referred to it as the Goldilocks syndrome to this problem. There is a much less fantastic solution to this problem. The Earth and the Sun are not billions of years old, and life was created relatively recently to live under the conditions we enjoy today.
So the age of the Sun. Obviously, as I said, energy by thermonuclear fusion. The core of the Sun changes over time, not a problem. It's going to last billions of years by design. But it becomes a problem if indeed the Sun is 4.5 billion years old. It has gotten a lot brighter over those 4.5 billion years. In fact, they tell us it would be about 40% brighter now than it was 4.5 billion years ago. So if we just kind of play this movie backwards, right now the Earth's average temperature is 59 degrees over the entire year, over the entire planet. Just a 25% increase in brightness is a 32 degree increase in temperature. Just 25%. What that would mean is that the average temperature when life was supposedly evolving on this planet was 27 degrees. This would have been a frozen tundra. This life would have never evolved here. Again, and this is a problem that the evolution theory creates on its own by these old ages. But now to go to the point. The idea that gases are changing at the same rate as the energy is changing from the sun is ridiculous, and indeed it is the Goldilocks syndrome. I would ask you, as you look at the sun, is that a scientific answer that these greenhouse gases are decreasing at the same rate as the sun is increasing, or is just this a convenience to keep evolution alive? Is it scientific? I have a theory. We do not need the fairy tale shifting greenhouse gases, increasing the intensity of the sun all at the same time, all simultaneously. Instead, the sun has only been around for a few thousand years, and life on Earth proves that point. Ice core drillings in Greenland. I made mention of this to my brother Derek just a little bit ago. So this is from the National Snow and Ice Data Center, and they say this: ice sheets form in areas where snow that falls in the winter does not entirely melt over the summer. Over thousands of years, the layers of snow pile up into thick masses of ice, growing thicker and denser as the weight of new snow and ice layers compress the old layers. Again, quoting them, the two ice sheets on Earth today cover most of Greenland and Antarctica. Evolutionists teach that Greenland has been covered with ice for more than 18 million years. And the current ice there is between 100,000 and 135,000 years old at the basement. You know what I would say to that? Right? I can't get it, but I would say that. Really? Okay, let's go look. So there's Greenland. There's the Antarctic ice sheet. This is the U.S. National Ice Core Laboratory in Denver, Colorado. This is where they store all these cores they've drilled. These are the sites, and they're hard to see, but they're yellow sites where they've done core drillings. Again, a couple of these have gone all the way to 10,000 feet deep till they hit basement rock. This is the picture of the ice core drilling machine. This is from Scientific America, 1998. You can see where they cut the groove and they just keep piling more tubes as they drill till they hit basement rock. This is what they taught. As you look at these layers, you see dark light, dark light, dark light, dark light, dark light. They taught that the dark was the summer layer where there had been some melting, which caused the dark layer, and the winter was the white layer, which was just snow being packed. And so you could count those layers, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, and divide by 2 and you have the number of years. This is easy. And so if you do this, you end up with a range between 100 and 135,000 years old for these ice cores that they've drilled at these multiple sites in Greenland and Antarctica. But we're talking about Greenland tonight. That was until the Lost Squadron, Derek. This is a reprint from Creation Ex Nihilo, June, August 1997, where they talk about the Lost Squadron. I'm going to let a couple of men tell you a little bit of background, then I'll pick it up from there. So this is Creation Magazine Live. The speakers are Richard Fangrad and Calvin Smith, and they'll talk about the Lost Squadron.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name is Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Calvin
Welcome
Smith.
to Creation Magazine Live. My name is Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Calvin Smith.
Now, this week on Creation Magazine Live, our topic is really about the Ice Age in the Bible, and we'll get there later. We want to begin with the amazing account of the Lost Squadron, as it has
This story helps to demonstrate that
come to be known.
This story helps to demonstrate that the biblical history is far superior explanation for the example, for example, the massive buildup of ice on Greenland, which is in some areas more than 10,000 feet thick. So let's begin with the account of the Lost Squadron. We'll read portions of an article from a June 1997 issue of Creation Magazine.
From a secret U.S. Army
and then we'll go from there.
in Greenland.
From a secret U.S. Army air base in Greenland, 6 P-38 Lightning fighter planes and 2 gigantic B-17 Flying Fortress bombers rose into the early dawn. The date was the 15th of July, 1942, and they were headed for a British airfield to join the war against Hitler.
Now, the P-38 Lightning was one of the deadliest planes to come out of World War II. It was powered by twin Allison V-12 engines. It had one 20-millimeter cannon and 4 50 caliber machine guns in its nose, and it was operational from 1941 to 49. The nickname given to it by German pilots because of its double tail was Gabelschwanz-Teufel, which means the forked-tongued devil.
I remember having a model of one, and I thought it was a cool airplane. Anyway, the article continues. Heading east over the polar ice cap, they ran into a massive blizzard. Flying blind, they heard that their first planned refueling stop in Iceland was socked in, forcing them to return to their home base. As they approached this, however, critically low on fuel, they found that it, too, was closed. Realizing that their only hope was to crash land on the icy wastes of Greenland's east coast, they desperately searched until they found a break in the cloud cover.
The nose wheel of the first plane to land hit a crevice, which caused it to flip, and you can see a picture of that actual plane right here. Fortunately, the impact on the canopy of the 8-ton P-38 was cushioned by snow, and the pilot's injuries were minor. After they saw this, the rest of the squadron came in with their wheels up for belly landings. The planes were only lightly damaged, and all of the crewmen were rescued unharmed by dog sled about 9 days later. However, the planes had to be abandoned where they had slithered to a stop.
It continues. In the years to follow, a few people occasionally recalled the legendary Lost Squadron of 1942, but it was only in 1980 that anyone thought of a salvage mission. U.S. airplane dealer Patrick Epps told his friend, architect Richard Taylor, that the planes would be like new. All we have to do is shovel the snow off the wings, fill them with gas, crank them up, and fly them off into the sunset. Nothing to it.
Okay. Now, the P-38s are highly prized collector's items. Only 5 were believed to still be flying at the time that the Lost Squadron was salvaged.
It took
the article continues.
It took
many years, many years, much money, and several failed expeditions before the first real clue came. Using a sophisticated form of radar with the help of an Icelandic geophysicist, they located 8 large shapes beneath the ice in 1988.
As a small makeshift steam probe began to melt a hole in the ice, expedition members watched dumbstruck as more and more extensions were added to the hose, some 75 meters or 250 feet before reaching the first airplane.
Here's a picture of what they call the gopher that melted the 250 deep, 4-foot diameter hole straight down through the ice to reach the aircraft. Hot water is pumped through the copper tubing you see there at the bottom end, and that's what melts the ice.
And the article continues. None of the discoverers thought that the planes could possibly be buried under more than a light cover of snow and ice. And why would they? After all, the impression the general public has is that the buildup of glacial ice takes very long time periods, thousands of years for just a few meters. Well, this story vividly shows how the impression that this buildup of snow takes a long time. That's just the way people think about it because of what they've been taught by evolutionary teaching.
Exactly.
So again, they left a base headed for England to assist in the war. It turned out the refuel station in Iceland was socked in. They turned around, couldn't make it back to base, ultimately crash landed on the ice in Greenland. Took years to find the planes. They were using radar and assistance, local assistance, but ultimately they did. The exact number buried in 263 feet of ice in just 48 years. There's a picture of the gopher. There's how they gophered down to the first plane. There's a picture of the actual holes they cut. You can see the ice rings as you go down. There's sort of just a mock-up of what they did. So they steamed that whole area out, cut up one of those planes, and took it out. It's actually flying today, or it was flying anyway. But let's do the math here. 42 to 1990, by the time they excavated the plane, that's 48 years. In those 48 years, 263 feet of snow, that's an average of 5.5 feet per year. Now, if you do there 10,000 feet divided by 5.5 feet per year, you end up with that snow accumulation being possible in 1,824 years. Not 100,000 years, not 135,000 years. Again, this fits easily within the creation model. What does Rich mean by that? Well, I mean that we know this would have happened post-flood, so we have 4,600 years for that ice to accumulate after the flood, and it could have accumulated in as quickly as 1,824 years. This is Bob Cardin, and he's just at 62 feet down. They hit the plywood cover that they had left in '83 when they couldn't reach the plains. That was an average of 8 foot per year. Bob said in the interview that many hundreds of layers of ice rings were there. As they went down, they just saw hundreds of rings. These are not annual rings. So now I ask you the question. The idea that the Greenland ice cap is 100 to 135,000 years old because of the rings, is that scientific? And I would submit unto you, absolutely not. We have obvious evidence that it could have accumulated and did accumulate on top of that, those airplanes much quicker. So I have a theory. The massive ice sheet that covers Greenland was created post-flood, and observable, measurable science demands that it's recent. The world's oldest tree. So if the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, how old do you think the oldest tree that we've ever found is? Okay, we have a guess. So let's look. This is the General Sherman in Sequoia National Forest. That's my wife and I standing in front of it. It's the largest tree on the planet. In fact, it's the largest living thing on the planet. The trunk estimated weight is 1,385 tons. The circumference at the base is 102.6 feet. Its original growth, how old is it though? Well, initially they thought it was 5,000 to 6,000 years old. Then they said, no, it's about 2,500 years old. Then as this science article from the Washington Post says, no, it's only about 2,000 years old. When Sandy and I visited, it's hard to read that, but they were estimating 2,300 to 2,700 when Sandy and I were there. Again, well within the biblical model, but it isn't the oldest tree. This is a picture of the oldest tree. It's a Methuselah bristlecone pine. It's part of a grove in California. It is the oldest living thing on the planet. There's another one, kind of gnarly looking. But as you might imagine, tree ring dating is not pure science. Let's be honest. We all know that a tree can produce multiple rings in a season. So it's not science anyway. But let's take a look at it. This textbook says the max age on the Methuselah tree is 4,300 years old. It goes on to say that's a max. It's probably younger. So now to the question, does a 4,300-year-old tree fit the biblical timeline? Well, of course it does. We have 2,000 years to Christ, 2,600 years back to the flood. It fits easily within a post-flood model of what we would expect to find the oldest tree. So I have a theory. The reason the oldest tree on the planet dates back to shortly after the flood is because all of our dates are absolutely accurate. And this is exactly what we would expect. Stalactite and stalagmite formation. I got to look at my time here. So according to the Bulletin of National Speleological Society, the observed growth rate for stalactites and stalagmites is 0.1 to 10 centimeters per 1,000 years, or 2.5 inches at the max end per 1,000 years. That is very slow. This is science-focused. The question, how long does it take stalactites and stalagmites to form? The answer, stalagmites and stalactites form extremely slowly, usually less than 10 centimeters, 2.5 inches, every 1,000 years. You know what I would say, right? Really. This is a textbook article about the Carlsbad Caverns. It tells us New Mexico's unfinished symphony was started 250 million years ago when tiny drops of water began to create these beautiful stalactites and stalagmites that form ever so slowly. Now this is hard to see. This is actually a picture in the cavern. That's Sandy and my oldest daughter. And there's a stalactite. It's easily 18 feet long. So it's got to be at least 86,000 years. Here's that same woman with her husband. There's a stalagmite. It goes off the screen. It's hundreds of thousands of years old, maybe 1 million years old, who knows? That was until we really started studying this. This comes from the book Caving Into Reality. What geologists used to believe was fact in terms of dating a cave now is speculation. From 1924 to 1988, there was a visitor sign above the entrance to Carlsbad Caverns that said Carlsbad was at least 260 million years old. In 1988, the sign was changed to read it's at least 7 to 10 million years old. Then for a little while, the sign was changed to it's 2 million years old. Now the sign is gone. In short, Trout says, geologists don't know how long these things take to develop, but he's done photo monitoring where he's observed growth rates of several inches in a matter of days, not 1,000 years. This is the Lincoln Memorial built in 1922. This photo was taken in the 60s. You can see the stalactites that are easily 5 to 6 feet in the span of just 38 years. This is a memorial in the state of Indiana. It's about 40 years old when this photo is taken. You can see the stalactite formations underneath the memorial, and you can see where the stalactite has actually connected to the stalagmite all within 40 years. This is a picture taken in 1987 of a lead mine in Australia. At the time, the mine was 55 years old. These are two men right here. Look at the stalactites. You can have massive growth in a very short period of time. This is TP Fountain in Thermopolis, Wyoming. A guy drove a pipe into a hot spring, and he started making I don't even know what you call it, a formation. Here was the 90-year celebration of the formation. 2.5 years per thousand, or 2.5 inches per 1,000 years? How about that many feet in just 90 years? This was taken just a few years later, 1998. A few years after the guy started his initial one, a guy down the street started one. It was such a crowd draw, he figured he'd make one in his front yard as well. Again, I would ask you, scientifically, does it take 2.5 inches for stalactites and stalagmites to form? Absolutely not. We have tons of examples. You can Google it online and find even more of rapid formation of these things. So I have a thought. Stalactite and stalagmite formations can happen very rapidly. Measurable and observable science denies an old age if this is what you're relying on to prove it. The helium level in the atmosphere. This is a little technical, but I need you to hear it. This next video clip is from Dr. Larry Vardaman. It's real quick, but it's dealing with helium in our atmosphere, where it comes from and how much is missing.
About 10 years ago, I published a monograph on helium in the atmosphere. Remember that monograph, The Age of the Earth's Atmosphere, the Escape of the Helium? Because we found that the helium is not in the atmosphere. Because we found that the helium is not in the atmosphere. There's a whole bunch of missing helium. It should be trapped in the atmosphere. And we find that the helium should be trapped in the atmosphere. It should not escape, and yet it's not there. Processes, it should not escape, and yet it's not there. There's 2,000 times less helium in the Earth's atmosphere than should be if the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Well, let me make a few comments. Where is the helium? First of all, it doesn't rise like a balloon in the atmosphere. First of all, it doesn't rise like a balloon in the atmosphere and escape through the top. It mixes throughout the entire atmosphere, and it leaks very, very slowly to space. The study I did before that less than 400 you see in the box, that less than 400 of 1% worth of helium of 4.5 billion years worth of helium in the crust production by nuclear decay in the crust is in the atmosphere. It doesn't escape from the atmosphere. Okay, it's not in the atmosphere. It doesn't escape from the atmosphere. Where is it? It's not in the atmosphere.
That's a great question.
Where is it?
So the Earth's atmospheric helium is created by radioactive decay of uranium and thorium in our crust. For every atom of uranium, again, I apologize, slightly technical, that decays, 8 atoms of helium are given off and 1 atom of lead is ultimately produced. For thorium to lead decay at 7 helium atoms are emitted. Pretty technical stuff, I agree. But there's a picture of the decay rate from uranium. You can see where the alphas are emitted, those are helium, and then all the way to lead. So the helium has no place to go but to our atmosphere. Dr. Melvin Cook determined and proved that it cannot escape from the atmosphere, and even if it did, at best it would be very slow. Based on this radioactive decay, there's only enough helium in our atmosphere to account for less than 65 years of decay, and that's if you start with 0 helium in the atmosphere to begin with. Where is all the helium for 4.5 billion years of the existence of a planet? Again, I would ask you, as you think about science, what is the scientific answer? That the Earth is 4.5 billion years and the helium is just missing from nuclear decay? Or is the correct answer the planet is much younger? So again, I have a theory. The reason we have such a small amount of helium in our atmosphere is the atmosphere was recently created, formed. Thank you, whoever worded that. We have to skip this because we're out of time, so I apologize for that. We'll go to the lightning round real quick. So just a couple things. The water cycle, as you look at our oceans are comprised of 51 different elements, 51 different chemicals. 20 of those could have accumulated in less than 1,000 years. 9 of those would have accumulated if they started at 0 in no more than 10,000 years, and 8 of those would have accumulated to their current levels in no more than 100,000 years. Again, the oceans deny an old planet. The sodium in our oceans, if it started at 0 to get to its current level, less than 42 million years old, not billions. The erosion, the current erosion we see, in 14 million years, the planet would be flat. The planet is not flat. C4 mud accumulation. Again, everything we have would have accumulated in 12 million years or less. And I would submit unto you that most of this happened at the flood, at the catastrophe. Written history is far too short. Man has supposedly been alive for 200,000 years, yet written history goes no further back than 5,000 years. We're led to believe that man sort of lumbered around in the dark for 195,000 years before he finally decided to start writing something. He carved on bones, he painted images on caves, but he never ever wrote anything. And that's just a little reflection of written history in 5,000 years. Number of ancient graves is far too few. Again, if man has existed for 200,000 years, we're missing about 8 billion graves on this planet of ancient man. This is a supposed 50,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton. We find very few of these. The reason? There's very few to find. Where are all the ancient graves? The oldest cultures using agriculture date back to 5,000 years. So again, man was a hunter-gatherer for 195,000 years before he finally said, you know, it might be a good idea to plant something and make this a little more efficient. Why aren't we at least told there's a great deal of evidence for a young creation? Why aren't our students, our children, being shown the massive evidence that the universe is young? I want to leave you with 2 closing questions. Maybe. Paul said this to the church of Rome in Romans 5:12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for all have sinned. So I have a first question. Why do all multicellular organisms die? It's not required. Science doesn't demand that multicellular organisms die. Why do all things living die? Science can explain the process. They can explain the accumulation of the mutations in our genome, but that's not answering the question. Why is it happening? Why are the built-in things at the cellular level unable to keep up with the mutations? The Bible answers that question for us. You see, it was by one man's sin, that death entered this world, and this entire creation was plunged into death. In fact, in Romans 8, Paul pictures the creation as groaning and travailing, waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. Science can answer many questions, but it can't answer that one. And the Bible gives us a crystal clear answer of why all things die, and it's because of sin. In the evolutionary story, death is the victor. We need death to advance the race. In the biblical story, death is the enemy. And guess what? Death is the enemy that Christ has already indeed defeated. My second question, Is God being honest when the Bible says that death came because of sin, if death has been around for millions and indeed billions of years? You see, God said the day you eat of that tree, you shall surely die. The evolutionists would have us believe that death has always been here. That is inconsistent with what the Bible tells us. A couple of weeks back, I told you what was at stake about the age of the earth, and I said, well, Genesis was at stake. In Exodus, where God is saying He created in 6 days and rested on the seventh day, that's at stake. In the New Testament, where Jesus said, in the beginning, He, referring to God, the Godhead created male and female, that was at stake. I'll tell you what's at stake. The gospel's at stake. Amen. Because you see, the gospel says that death came because of man's sin, and Christ came to defeat death. That is not the evolutionary story. Thank you.